morning and welcome to Frank's School. This looks like a lot. I better erase as I go. I'm going to adjust that camera just a little bit. Half the time I get it wrong when I adjust it. Make it worse. Anyway, this is part of the June update, which I've spoken about before. And I want to address this business of extreme mulching. That's my name for it. It's probably not new. Surely permaculture and other places have dealt with this matter. I ended up kind of stumbling onto it really. And I want to give you my view of it, which I think is probably going to be a little bit different. Although I say it's not new, I haven't yet seen the book or the article that tells of it just the way I mean. But first of all, that last video, if you thought about those boards laying on a 45, as you go down the end across that gap, you might wonder, well, what's going to hold the ends? Well, you'd have to put blocks in there right at the ends, since there's nothing to rest the far end on. Blocks. And another thing you could do is down through that 16-inch gap, you could run short joists or long joists, it wouldn't matter, but not pallets. You don't really have to cut the pallets for that, and I wouldn't even recommend it. Now, that was the other video. Now, in my building of the set, resurrecting this village, two new materials became available to me over the last couple years, and they affected what I'm doing a lot. One is dunnage, which I spoke before. Is that I'm able to get very cheaply 4x4s, 8 foot long. And the other is bunker cover. It's a kind of plastic. It's 10 mil, 9 or 10 mil thick. It's thick, it's white on one side, black on the other. I'll have more to say about that. But I can also get lots of that because it's thrown away. I can get really as much as I want of that for free. Dunnage, very, very cheap. Bunker cover, free. All right, now this extreme mulching technique that I use, it's a way of taking an area covered with perennials and moving it over to annuals, plants. The place I've really first used it was there was a grass there called sawgrass. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, and I actually don't. I think it's perennial, but how to get control of it. But anyway, this technique would work with perennials and to annuals, which, well, I'll say more about that. Another thing, certain plants spread vegetatively by the roots, by the rhizomes. This would be for plants that spread by seed. And seed is very cheap nowadays. It's very cheap. Maybe not for individual tomato plants or pumpkins and stuff like that, but for ground covers and grains, it is very, very cheap, and you can just broadcast it. And this word economic, what I mean is, of all the tens of thousands of species of plants that are out there are only about 200 or 300, maybe 400, that are almost vital to human culture as we know it. And they're called economic plants. They are to humans seemingly much more useful, although the others are critical as well. But anyway, so many of the economic plants are annual plants, corn, the grains, and then ground covers like, well, yeah, clover tends to be biennial, I think. But anyway, the technique works best for that. That's what it's intended for. And with this technique, I'm going to say about an acre. I am farming, and you shouldn't think it just happens in a single year. It's a gradual process. But I am essentially gardening and or farming about an acre by myself, and it's petrol-free. I'm not using a hoe. I'm not using any kind of an engine. And I am absorbing waste in the process. I had said, out in the middle of the Great Plains, where these machines that are as wide as a house go across and harvest the wheat, monoculture for the whole center of the United States, I actually think this technique plopped right down in the middle of the field. Of course, it would stop the machine, or else it'd mow you down. But I think it would be more efficient. I'm sure, actually, when you count all the gasoline and the rest of the stuff. All right, now the technique itself. I would add it to contour gardening, which I've talked about before. Contour gardening, well, you couldn't do that maybe at first because it would be too hard. You'd first have to get past get that sod broken down some before you could maybe do it. But that would certainly be the best way. Add contour gardening so that you could irrigate it and or drain it as you wish. So I guess that maybe can't always be a first step. But anyway, it should be added to that because that also is extremely useful. Now, basically, there are 3 layers that I work with. The first is opaque. The second one is intended to be maybe not quite so opaque, but warmer. And the third is translucent. So if you'd imagine an impervious, opaque cover, bunker cover would be perfect. Now I know that gardeners use an awful lot of plastic. They lay it on the ground. It's usually thin though. This bunker cover that I'm talking about is different. It's not 2 or 4 or 6 mil. It's almost 10 mil thick. It is strong, and it's black on one side, white on the other. But if it's impervious, it works. If you lay something on the ground, even a rug or something like that, and if it doesn't rain, it's a dry time. Still, in the morning when you pick it up, it's usually wet underneath that. And an impervious layer is going to stop that interrupt with that breathing off of water, which is not always what you need, but you do have to have some water to get the seeds started. A blanket is perfect for the worm, and it maybe isn't. I think it's kind of necessary because it will breathe. It won't just trap that moisture. But underneath the blanket, a sheet. So, and you'd take these off and well, gradually. The sheet would be the last thing that you'd take off, but you'd probably take them off and put them back on. And the sheet, in order to it's just an example, but something translucent that's going to let the area breathe, but it's also going to not have the sun beat on those seeds or the first germinated plants. I'm avoiding the preparation of a seed bed. You know, all that work, that petrol, or with Jethro Tull's horse hoeing husbandry, the horse doing all that plowing and disking and harrowing and scratching and to prepare a perfect seed bed. Well, I think it seems to be, it can be avoided with this technique. The seed will work its way, the roots will work their way down if they're treated gently. And I say opaque, well, anything opaque. Old roofing works fine. Old plywood that you can barely pick it up because it's so rotten, it works fine too. And this doesn't really need to be weighted. So it can be all kinds of stuff that you lay on there. The point is you're cutting off the sun and therefore killing off the plants that are already there. It maybe takes a month, 2 months, maybe a season. But so does plowing. Plowing is an extremely violent act. All right, now, let's see. And you need weights. Usually, not maybe for plywood, but weights. Tires are the ones I started with. And I want to say something about the tires. They're so unsatisfactory because you lay a tire down in the middle open area, you know, whatever you're trying to kill off or mulch away, it grows up. But if you just lay a scrap of bunker cover, even a feed sack like this, now this is translucent, but even that would probably work almost as well. Just lay that in the middle and then put a tire on it. Tires, pallets, I've used pallets. Now pallets they're not so well, neither one of these are terribly easy to move, but a healthy man or woman can certainly move them, and you just flip them over to where you're going to use them next. Rotten boards. I recently started to use that because I have a lot available at the moment. The thing about rotten boards, they're only weights, but if there's still nails in them, I mean, then make sure the nails are pointing down always. If you suspect there's nails in boards, You want to lay always boards with the nails pointing down until you can bend them over or pull them or flatten them out. All right, you lay the impervious layer on there, or all those layers on there, until you're content that it's killed back. Then you take the stuff off and you scatter the seed, whatever seed you want. Now, that seed certainly doesn't need to be monoculture, and it really shouldn't be either. I sow together sometimes 10 different kinds of seeds, partly because I want to see what grows and what doesn't grow. But, you know, in farming, they talk about a nurse crop. You grow oats as the nurse crop for the hay crop that you hope later. That's kind of traditional farming here. Well, it's sort of the same. I mean, a grain, but then also clovers and trefoil, tillage radishes. You can get all kinds of stuff. Well, it doesn't have to be annuals either. If you want to reestablish it in something perennial, then that's a fine way to do it. And you can sow it, you can harvest it, I believe. I'm feeling my way into this, but you can harvest it piggyback. In other words, the grain, at the moment I'm using a lot of, or beginning to use buckwheat, because you can plant buckwheat very late in the summer. And if you're harvesting by hand, you should be able to harvest the buckwheat and without cutting up all the rest that's underneath it, as you would with a machine. And you can harvest gradually. You can continue to sow gradually. It's a nuanced process. And then finally, the timing, as opposed to monoculture. Well, once the buckwheat's off, depending on the condition of the soil, you could scatter into that area, say tillage radishes or turnips or something for the winter. You're not going to have the same response as a perfectly prepared seed bed. It's not going to be the same. There'll be more seeds that don't really make it. But anyway, I find that it works, and with it, I'm going to have more to say tomorrow or the next time about this plastic. But I want to say something about it, because how else could one man, without machinery, with soil that's not particularly very good, swampy or whatever, how could you possibly tackle that to farm it? Well, there's a way. And I've even thought in the old days, now here's something, the history of agriculture, I've never actually read about mulching being older than plowing, but it seems to me it must have been. You might wonder, well, what did they mulch with? Leaves, mats, woven mats. Woven mats would do just the same thing. All right, anyway, bye for now.